Between 1970 and 1975, 9 Class 1 railroads went bankrupt. Penn Central alone became the largest corporate collapse in American history. Bankrupt carriers operated 21% of United States track, while return on equity cratered to 2.5%. American railroading was dying, but not every railroad died. Subscribe now as we count down 10 that reached the brink, and the technology that saved each one. From steam holdouts to mountain-grade breakthroughs, each survived differently. Which earned number 1? Let's find out, starting at 10. A railroad that bet everything on a machine the industry had already abandoned. In the 10th place, Norfolk and Western stood at a crossroads in the post-war years, as the rest of the industry rushed to dieselize and passenger traffic bled away. Instead of following the crowd, Norfolk and Western doubled down on steam, pinning its hopes on the Class J, a locomotive that defied its era. The Class J delivered 4,400 horsepower at the drawbar and a tractive effort of 70,000 pounds. Numbers that kept passenger trains running at 100 miles per hour through the Blue Ridge. At a time when capital for new diesels was scarce, these engines offered a critical reprieve. A turnaround time of just 55 minutes, nearly cutting the industry norm in half, meant more runs per day and less idle equipment. Roanoke's shops could overhaul a Class J for less than the cost of a comparable diesel service, and coal, abundant on Norfolk and Western's own lines, kept fuel bills predictable when oil prices spiked. By deferring the massive outlay required for diesel conversion, Norfolk and Western bought itself a few more years of solvency and credibility with shippers. The Class J did not solve the long-term crisis, but it bought time, enough to preserve passenger revenue and keep the railroad afloat until a full modernization could be planned. In an industry where time was running out, that was enough to make survival possible, if only for a little while. Number 9. Baltimore and Ohio faced a relentless squeeze from all sides as the 1950s wore on. The Interstate Commerce Commission refused to let Baltimore and Ohio shed its money, losing passenger trains, even as trucks and airlines siphoned away travelers. Every mile of mandated service meant mounting deficits. By 1955, Baltimore and Ohio's annual passenger losses topped $11 million, a figure that threatened to tip the entire railroad into insolvency. Steam engines, with their high labor needs and voracious coal appetites, only made the problem worse. The turning point arrived with the EMD E8 diesel. Packing 2,250 horsepower from twin engines, the E8 slashed fuel consumption by 21% compared to its predecessor, the E6, and allowed Baltimore and Ohio to cut crews on every run. On the Cleveland to Chicago corridor alone, the railroad reported a 30% reduction in crew costs after deploying E8 locomotives. These efficiencies translated directly into the bottom line. Baltimore and Ohio's filings with the Interstate Commerce Commission show a $2.5 million swing to the positive within 18 months of full dieselization. The E8 did not end the regulatory burden, but it transformed a guaranteed loss into a manageable cost, buying Baltimore and Ohio the time and cash flow needed to survive an era when so many others collapsed. 8th place, Southern Railway faced a crisis that threatened to erase its grain business. By the late 1950s, nearly 60% of its grain shipments had vanished, lost to subsidized barges and the rising tide of interstate trucking. The railroad's leadership, unwilling to accept this decline, took a bold step, proposing a 60% cut to its grain shipping rates, slashing the cost per ton-mile from 42 cents to 17 cents. The Interstate Commerce Commission blocked the move, calling it unfair and discriminatory. Southern fought back, carrying its case through the courts all the way to the Supreme Court. In 1963, the justices ruled in Southern's favor, setting a national precedent and clearing the way for the rate cut. However, the legal victory alone was not enough. The real breakthrough came in the form of the Big John Hopper, a 100-ton aluminum-covered car that cut tare weight by a quarter and doubled payload per trip. With Big John, Southern could move more grain with fewer cars and less fuel, dropping cost per ton mile by nearly 30%. Within a year, grain ton miles rebounded by 44%, and profit margins on grain traffic soared from 2% to 9%. Southern's gamble on legal strategy and rolling stock innovation did more than save its own balance sheet. It set the template for how American railroads could fight back against highway and river competition, using technology and regulation as twin levers of survival. Number 7. Santa Fe faced a crossroads where image and efficiency became lifelines. As passenger revenues collapsed in the 1950s and 1960s, the railroad's premium freight business was suddenly at risk. Trucking lines and rival carriers circled, ready to undercut Santa Fe's contracts the moment reliability slipped or rates edged up. The challenge was not just moving goods, it was convincing shippers that Santa Fe still offered unmatched value. Enter the EMDF units, streamlined diesels delivering up to 1,750 horsepower, paired with a visual identity that would become legendary: the Warbonnet paint scheme. These locomotives were not just machines. They were rolling billboards, projecting speed, modernity, and trust. Internally, the F units cut average dwell time by 12 minutes per train, enabling a 10% increase in daily departures on the critical Chicago to Los Angeles corridor. That frequency gain translated directly into a $5 million annual revenue boost, as shippers paid a premium for guaranteed schedules and fast turnarounds. Fuel efficiency improved by 8% over the older FT fleet, but the real power of the F units came from the loyalty they inspired. Santa Fe's contract pricing logs show that even as competitors slashed rates, the railroad maintained higher per-car margins thanks to its reputation for dependability and style. In a decade defined by cost-cutting, Santa Fe proved that brand equity and operational discipline could be as vital as horsepower in keeping a railroad solvent. Number 6. Union Pacific faced a challenge that threatened to break the economics of mountain railroading. As the 1960s gave way to the 1970s, the cost of hauling ever longer, heavier trains over the Rockies and Sierra Nevada soared. Traditional practice demanded helper locomotives, extra engines, and crews stationed at the base of each grade, driving up labor costs and creating operational bottlenecks. The railroad's solution was as audacious as the mountains themselves. It was the DDA 40X Centennial. This was not just another diesel, it was the most powerful single-frame locomotive ever built, packing 6,600 horsepower and a staggering 140,000 pounds of tractive effort. With the Centennial, Union Pacific could move 30,000-ton coal trains over the highest passes using fewer locomotives and without the need for helper consists. Fuel consumption dropped by 25% per ton mile compared to the 3-unit lash-ups it replaced. Over 5 years, internal reports credited the Centennial program with cutting $12 million in operating expenses, largely through reduced crew hours and lower maintenance frequency. The DA-40s represented a bespoke solution, tailored for Union Pacific's unique geography and traffic mix, but it proved that scaling up horsepower could fundamentally change the cost structure of mountain railroading. The lesson would echo through the industry. Sometimes survival depends on building the biggest engine the world has ever seen. Number 5. Penn Central stands as the cautionary tale at the heart of the rail industry's crisis. In June 1970, the company filed for bankruptcy, at the time the largest corporate collapse in American history. With an operating ratio that soared to 108%, Penn Central was spending more to run trains than it was earning in revenue. The merger of the Pennsylvania and New York Central Railroads had created a sprawling, fragmented network, but management failed to bring order or efficiency to its locomotive fleet. Instead of investing in a standardized roster, Penn Central clung to a patchwork of aging engines, each with its own quirks, maintenance needs, and spare parts. The result was chaos in the shops and on the main line. Parts shortages led to chronic downtime, and locomotive failures became routine, driving up costs and eroding shipper confidence. Yet in the midst of this collapse, a lesson emerged, one that would shape the survival strategy of nearly every railroad that followed. The EMD GP series road switchers, with their modular design and widespread parts interchangeability, offered a blueprint for operational stability. Other railroads that adopted the GP standard saw measurable gains. Maintenance costs dropped, downtime shrank, and fleet management became predictable. Penn Central's failure to embrace this approach stands in stark contrast to the success of those who did. The GP series did not save Penn Central, but it saved the industry from repeating its mistakes. The story of Penn Central is a warning. Technology alone cannot rescue a railroad without disciplined management and a commitment to standardization. For the survivors, this was the turning point, a shift from bespoke fleets to modular economies of scale that would define the next era of American railroading. Number 4, Missouri Pacific faced a crossroads in the shadow of Penn Central's collapse. As the 1970s opened, the railroad's sprawling network was burdened by a patchwork of aging locomotives, each demanding custom repairs, unique spare parts, and hours of diagnostic guesswork. Every minute spent troubleshooting meant trains idling in yards, contracts at risk, and cash bleeding from the balance sheet. The stakes were clear. Without a radical reduction in maintenance overhead, Mopac's solvency would evaporate in the same regulatory quicksand that had claimed its rivals. The answer arrived in the form of the EMD SD42, a diesel locomotive engineered not just for brute strength, but for reliability and ease of upkeep. With 3,000 horsepower and a continuous tractive effort of 95,000 pounds, the SD42 could pull heavy freights across the Midwest, but its true breakthrough was under the hood. Modular electronic systems cut diagnostic time by half, transforming days of guesswork into hours of targeted repair. Mopac's own memos record a net saving of $8 million over 5 years, as maintenance crews spent less time on troubleshooting and more time keeping trains in motion. Standardization meant fewer parts in inventory, less downtime, and a 50% reduction in shop bottlenecks. By adopting the SD42 as its backbone, Missouri Pacific achieved a level of operational predictability that set it apart from the chaos engulfing the industry. The lesson was unmistakable. In an era of uncertainty, the path to survival lay in making the complex simple, and in trusting that a single dependable machine could keep an entire railroad out of bankruptcy. Coming to the top 3, Southern Pacific's mountain empire teetered on the edge of disaster every time its freight trains entered the Sierra tunnels. The problem was both simple and devastating. Standard diesel locomotives with their high-mounted cooling intakes suffocated on hot, stagnant air trapped beneath miles of granite. Each overheating incident meant hours lost, contracts at risk, and repair bills that threatened to tip the railroad into insolvency. In the early 1970s, the frequency of tunnel failures climbed so high that Southern Pacific's own logs recorded up to 2 engine temperature alarms for every 1,000 miles on the Donner Pass route. Every unscheduled stop cost thousands, and in a single year, the railroad faced over $4 million in avoidable repairs and lost tractive effort. The SD45 T2 tunnel motor rewrote the rules. By relocating the radiator intakes to just above the rails and reversing the fan arrangement to draw cool air from the tunnel floor, this 3,600 horsepower locomotive kept its V20 prime mover in the safe zone, even on the steepest grades. The difference was immediate and dramatic. Overheating incidents dropped by more than 90%. Unscheduled maintenance fell by 1/5, and on-time performance across the mountain corridor improved by 5%. With 115,000 pounds of tractive effort and a low roof profile designed for the Sierra's tight clearances, the tunnel motor turned a choke point into a competitive advantage. Southern Pacific's Financial Review credited the SD405T2 with saving the railroad from a downward spiral of lost revenue and escalating costs. In a crisis where no margin for error remained, it was a single engineering decision, born of necessity and precision, that kept Southern Pacific's mountain routes alive. Number 2, Denver and Rio Grande Western faced a stark choice in the shadow of the Rockies. As the 1970s unfolded, the narrow corridors of the Moffat Tunnel route became a liability, because mountain grades, tight clearances, and brutal winters conspired to push operating costs ever higher. Every locomotive failure inside the 6-mile tunnel spelled disaster, lost hours, stranded trains, and contracts slipping away to highways that never closed for snow. For a capital-starved railroad, the prospect of buying a new fleet was out of reach. Instead, Denver and Rio Grande Western turned to adaptation, a retrofit program that would decide the line's fate. The solution began with a close study of Southern Pacific's tunnel motor experiment. Denver and Rio Grande Western engineers took 30 standard road locomotives and invested $150,000 per unit to install low-mounted radiator intakes and oversized cooling fans. The goal was simple: keep engines cool where standard designs suffocated on hot, stagnant tunnel air. The technical upgrade delivered immediate returns. Tractive effort held steady at 80,000 pounds. But the real victory was reliability. Within a year, tunnel-related locomotive failures dropped by 30%. The corridor's annual freight throughput rose by $1.2 million, a lifeline for a railroad with no margin for error. This retrofit wasn't just about engineering. It was a bet on survival through incremental investment. Where others abandoned marginal lines, Denver and Rio Grande Western proved that targeted capital, when wisely deployed, could transform a vulnerable mountain carrier into a viable, competitive link. The tunnel motor program delivered a high return on limited funds and offered a blueprint for other hard-pressed lines facing similar terrain. In a business where every dollar counted and every hour lost risked bankruptcy, Denver and Rio Grande Western's retrofit gamble paid off, setting the stage for the industry-wide leap that would follow. And finally, in first place, Southern Railway stands as the railroad that not only saved itself, but reshaped the entire industry. At the dawn of 1960, Southern faced the same existential threats as its peers: freight bleeding to trucks and barges, rigid regulation that strangled price competition, and costs rising faster than revenue. The prospect of bankruptcy loomed as grain traffic collapsed and labor expenses soared. Yet under the leadership of D.W. Brosnan, Southern chose a different path, one that would set the template for modern railroading. Brosnan's strategy was neither a single locomotive nor a quick fix, but an integrated system of operational innovation. The first breakthrough was the unit train, a concept that bundled 100 identical cars, like the Big John aluminum hopper, into a single uninterrupted block. These trains moved from origin to destination without being split, switched, or delayed, slashing dwell time in yards by more than half. Instead of 45 minutes of idle waiting, cars now spent less than 20 minutes between arrival and departure. For Southern's core grain business, this meant a cost per ton-mile drop of nearly 15%, restoring competitiveness against subsidized barge lines and highway haulers. The Supreme Court's landmark 1963 decision allowed Southern to cut its grain rates by 60%, but it was the unit train's efficiency that made those rates sustainable. The transformation did not stop at rolling stock. Brosnan pushed for the adoption of radio-controlled helper locomotives, GP38s equipped to receive commands from the lead unit. On mountain grades, this technology saved 2 crew members per train, a direct attack on runaway labor costs. Combined with more efficient fuel use, radio helpers delivered annual savings of $2 million, a margin that meant survival in an era when every dollar counted. The final piece was centralization. Southern's computer-based dispatch system, launched in 1966, brought real-time oversight to every train, car, and crew. By integrating scheduling, car tracking, and crew assignments into a single platform, the railroad cut dispatching errors by 40% and unlocked a 5-year cumulative profit gain of $120 million. This system became the model for rail traffic management nationwide. The results were dramatic. Southern's net ton miles climbed from 2 billion in 1960 to 3.4 billion by 1975. Its operating ratio fell from 76% to 61%, and return on equity tripled. While 9 major railroads entered bankruptcy from 1970 to 1975, Southern not only survived, it thrived. The innovations pioneered under Brosnan's watch were soon adopted industry-wide, forming the backbone of the deregulated, market-driven rail system that followed the Staggers Act of 1980. Southern's story is a call to action. In the face of collapse, it was not just hardware, but the synergy of leadership, technology, and operational discipline that saved the railroad and pointed the way forward for an entire industry. Let's hear your thoughts. What railroad rescue surprised you most? Across all 10 cases, one pattern stands out. Survival hinged on bold bets, where financial brinkmanship met mechanical ingenuity. Technology alone wasn't enough, and only those railroads that matched innovation to strategy beat collapse. Today, every freight train running is proof that adaptation, not size or legacy, defines industry survival. Thanks for watching, and share your favorite turnaround below.